What did you make of the promotional video? What do you make of the impact?
I mean, look, the video was incredible, wasn't it? The cafe they filmed it in belongs to Francis Ford Coppola, and I was saying to a colleague, it's almost like he directed it himself, right? It was so grand. Look, love Jony Ive. Yeah, I think he's obviously an incredibly gifted man. I think this is an incredibly difficult thing for even him to achieve, because creating the kind of hardware, which their stated aim really is to topple the iPhone as the leading device of choice when it comes to interacting with computing. I think that's incredibly difficult, and I think for all the experience and talent that Jony Ive has and the team that he's assembled, which Sam Altman called, I think, the most gifted, talented team ever assembled in history, which kind of gives you an idea of the hyperbole he's working with at the moment.
Marvel unite.
Yeah, precisely. I just think it's an incredibly tall order. I think it's easier for Apple to solve AI than it is for OpenAI to create the new iPhone, put it that way.
Okay, so Dave, let me go back to basics on the story. What the entity, OpenAI and I.O., is saying is that by the end of 2026, they'll have a range of devices, but we don't know what form factor, right? We don't know smartphone or, dare I say, chunky brooch a la Humane. I just want to get the basics of that out there. But to me, this seems like an acqui-hire, because what OpenAI is getting is not just Jony Ive, but a team of other former Apple designers, and who are, according to the press release, remaining independent.
Well, look, this is all about bringing in the expertise that OpenAI just doesn't have. I mean, of course, look, they've done incredibly well in creating a leading AI company, and it's seen as being ahead of the pack still. And ChatGPT has a huge market share in terms of people who are willing to go to a website to put an AI prompt in and get what they need. The problem is that over time, I think that way of interacting with AI gets a lot less useful, and I think we're seeing signs of that already. We've seen how Google are putting AI straight into their search engine in a big way, and that's a way to capitalize on a tool that people already use, and they find AI that way. OpenAI doesn't necessarily have that same vector. It doesn't have a device like Apple. It doesn't have sort of Amazon's reach with the cloud. It doesn't have a social network like Meta. It doesn't have a search engine like Google. And so they have to do something, right? They have to create something that's going to be the place that people interact with OpenAI specifically. And a piece of hardware is the way to do that. This is a very good, albeit expensive, way to bring on that expertise. But then, the complications will follow. I think next year's keynote, if they decide to present it in this way, of this new device, whatever it is, and there's been reporting this morning that it's perhaps like a third device in addition to your laptop and your phone, there'll be something else. I mean, that's going to be a very watched keynote. I think it's a big ask to expect people to add another device to their day, because we saw, like you mentioned, with some of those other wearables, that people from the word go just weren't very impressed. I think Jony Ive is probably going to be a better judge of making something people like than those companies perhaps were. But I still think he's asking a lot of people to get on board with.
Jony Ive was pretty critical of Humane and others having tried AI hardware.
Yes.
What's interesting, though, is Eddie Q, the Apple executive, was giving evidence at that Google legal fight, saying in 10 years' time we probably won't be using iPhones. We're going to discuss the Apple impact, but more broadly, do you think that this is a moment that we should be risk-off with Apple?
I think the context of those comments from Eddie Q were in a competition hearing where it served the company very well for him to say there's a big threat against the iPhone. I do think what this is doing at the very least is highlighting the fact that Apple has been caught very much on the back foot. Since Jony Ive left, I think it was almost 6 years ago, there hasn't been this sort of product visionary in the company. They haven't sort of hired behind him in a way that most people might have wanted. So I do think it sort of highlights that Apple has just huge amounts of work to do.
I want to go back to basics even further. Like, I think about how I use ChatGPT every day, and I use it through my iPhone, frankly, either voice mode or for auto text. How much of this story is about OpenAI thinking to itself that exact question? How are people going to use our software in the future?
Yeah, I think that's a big lingering concern, I think, for the entire company. Particularly as, as Caroline just mentioned, I mean, this was, Jony Ive has been quite outspoken about what he sees as legacy devices of the iPhone and of Mac, just laptops in general, I guess you could say. I do wonder what this announcement might do for OpenAI's relationship with Apple, incidentally, because obviously you can use ChatGPT on the iPhone now as a sort of almost add-on service. I wonder if Apple might be thinking a bit more carefully about how they manage manage that relationship. But yeah, I just think this is about bringing ChatGPT into a everyday device in a way that's going to be much more integrated. Right now, as you say, people use the app. But I don't think this is going to be something that people go to an app specifically for. I think it's going to be a tool that's within a tool they're using for something else. And that's the big challenge they have.